captive audience. I'm Kevin Hoare, and it is the 17th of June here in Portland, Oregon. And we got a lot of stuff to cover today. I think you'll enjoy the show today. You know, I haven't even spent 5 seconds looking at the national news. So I'm going to do that really fast here because, you know, just a constant conveyor belt of stuff to cover. And some of this isn't news, like powerful New Jersey Democrat charged with racketeering. Yes, and it rains a lot in Oregon. The FBI suddenly cancels Capitol Hill briefing on warrant-proof encryption. Jeez, I wonder what that could be about. And House Republicans to investigate Office of Special Counsel for alleged IRS whistleblower retaliation. You know, I think before all is said and done, if justice is done, the Office of Special Counsel is maybe going to see some people doing time, which would be great because actually they've justly earned it. With their actions, they could have stopped at unethical, but they decided to go all the way to illegal. And I think this is when someone actually has to pay for the abusive, unethical investigations because they've actually crossed the line. You might have heard the really interesting national news as well that a Kentucky federal judge has issued an injunction against the Title IX rules in 6 different states. He said that Title IX rules have serious First Amendment implications because they compel speech from educators. And that preliminary injunction against the Biden administration's Title IX overhaul is on hold in the states of Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, Ohio, Virginia, and West Virginia. And it comes less than a week after a federal judge in Louisiana issued a similar ruling in a case filed by Louisiana, Mississippi, Montana, and Idaho. And it impacts only 6 states that were part of the lawsuit. So that's the reason why it's limited in that case, along with the Christian Educators Association International. The rules that were finalized by the Department of Miseducation, which we're all familiar with at this point, and what it's been doing, they're supposed to go into effect August 1st and expand the definition of sex discrimination to include gender identity and pregnancy. But the agency didn't issue any rules relating to transgender athletes. Among the changes include a prohibition on single-sex bathrooms and locker rooms and requirements that schools use pronouns based on a student's preferred gender identity. So this is not the will of the people being expressed by its elected representatives in these states. This is a bureaucrat working for the brainless moron that is our commander-in-chief. And I'm not going to mince words at all on this. He is out to lunch. Everybody's seen it, and people are starting to admit that this is the case, who find it very uncomfortable and disconcerting since they bet everything on this guy. But he's got people doing this stuff. Well, I won't even say at his behest because I don't think he knows. He doesn't know anything. But he is definitely got people issuing orders and then just imposing this on people in different states by reinterpreting an old statute. So this is why it's getting caught up in the courts, is they're trying to take Title IX and turn it into a gender identity rule. But the Kentucky order said the department would turn Title IX on its head by redefining sex to include gender identity. But sex and gender identity do not mean the same thing, according to the order by this judge. The Kentucky Attorney General, Russell Coleman, said, as a parent and as an Attorney General, I join this effort to protect women and girls from harm. Today's ruling recognized 50 plus years of educational opportunities Title IX has created for students and athletes. And this would actually go and reverse some of these gains in the name of hyper wokeness. So the judge said that the new Title IX rules have serious implications, First Amendment implications. They compel speech from educators. This is a big victory for women and girls because Title IX revisions being pushed by the Biden administration would have ended sex-based protections for biological women in locker rooms, bathrooms, sports, and elsewhere, plain and simple. This is what the West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey said. This is a retreat. And I'll quote again, retreat from the progress women have made. So now what we have is an anti-female movement that is pretending to be tolerant, and in the process are actually reversing progress women have made that ensured and provided them protections in locker rooms, bathrooms, and sports facilities. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with this one on appeal, but I do know that this is the beginning of the fight, not the end. And I think women got to speak up. So do men. Got to speak up on behalf of women who are wives and daughters and sisters and mothers who are being downgraded by bureaucrats issuing executive decrees reinterpreting 50-year-old laws that are to the detriment of women. So that's interesting news. And I think this is, well, actually, Bobby, I think what they're doing is they're trying to erase the idea that women are distinct and special. And in doing so, disrupt the concept of a family even existing. And that leads to people potentially not having families, or families not being unrecognizable and not conducive to well-adjusted children, which unleashes a whole set of problems on society, which we've already got plenty of those, don't we? So this is an interesting bit of news. The Kansas Attorney General is suing Pfizer for allegedly misleading the public about its COVID-19 vaccine. It's Pfizer was only one of course, a handful of major pharmaceutical companies that got FDA approval for its vaccine. But the state of Kansas is now alleging that the company was dishonest about the risks. I guess maybe our court system can get to the truth. It hasn't been done very effectively, if at all, through hearings by elected officials yet. So Kansas Attorney General Chris Kobach sued Pfizer on Monday, and they are focusing really on the rare complication that could cause heart inflammation in and around the heart, but also that there were risks for pregnant women, including risk of a mother having a miscarriage. Though there have been studies that contradict that assertion, but he is saying, the Kansas Attorney General is saying, Pfizer made multiple misleading statements to deceive the public about the vaccine at a time when Americans needed the truth. Pfizer said the COVID-19 vaccine was effective even though they knew its vaccine waned over time and did not protect against COVID-19 variants. Pfizer responded to the lawsuit claiming it did not believe the suit had any merit, and it was proud to have created the vaccine so quickly. The representations made by Pfizer about its COVID-19 vaccine have been accurate and science-based, said Pfizer, and they're deeply committed to the well-being of the patients they serve, and they have no higher priority than ensuring the safety and effectiveness of its treatments. So it comes after Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton filed a similar lawsuit in the Lone Star State last year. So there's a number of these suits that are starting to travel through the court system, and and hopefully can compel a finding of facts, which have gone wanting in much of the process so far following the conclusion of the pandemic. So, one more little national news story, or two more, I think, that are really interesting. One is the Secret Service says that they're ready for the disruptions that are going to happen at the Democrat National Convention in Chicago. They say they know there's going to be a bunch of disruptions, and but they kind of poo-pooed the idea that it would be any different than any other convention. The Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle, who's a graduate from Eastern Illinois University, is touring the convention venues in Chicago, Milwaukee. Said each city is unique and different. The venues are different. The schedule of events is different. So there are going to be differences that you're going to see between each convention. But for us, security and the security plan remains the same. Well, it doesn't sound like they've adapted terribly much to the extraordinary circumstance likely to occur in Chicago, because the war in Gaza is going to continue for sure through August 19th through the 22nd, when that convention takes place. And we know that there's going to be a conflagration of pro-Hamas protesters from all over the country, because we've seen it even in mundane events like a fundraising dinner in Portland, where the protesters went and beat on the windows of the hotel while Jeff Merkley made a speech talking about how wonderful the Democrat Party is. So they said about 3,000 officers are undergoing specialized training to respond to civil unrest and possible riots. Even if it's not an act of violence and it appears peaceful, but is violating the law, blocking roadways, blocking venues, things of that nature, we will declare mass arrests in those situations. It's interesting they're only going to do that for a convention, but then when it happens the rest of the time, they're just fine with it. Well, at least in many cities. I don't know if Chicago, Chicago, if you remember 1968, that was that song, The Night Chicago Died. And those were anti-Vietnam War protesters at the time who got particularly violent. And then Mayor Daley, Democrat mayor in a Democrat machine city, called out the hippie thumpers and beat up everybody. And apparently that just inflamed the circumstances just a little bit. So, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen there, but I don't think that they're anticipating a bunch of MAGA Republicans showing up to protest. I think they're looking at was inevitably going to be the people who usually get carte blanche to do whatever protesting they want. By the way, I didn't post that story here about the investigation into what the special counsel did to retaliate against the IRS whistleblowers. Let's remember, by the way, one thing about the IRS whistleblowers. Even though these are just token charges to kind of draw public attention away from the real meaty stuff that could implicate Joe Biden in wrongdoing and tax evasion and bribery and so on. These gun charges against Hunter Biden wouldn't have even have happened. They wouldn't have even been filed if it weren't for these IRS whistleblowers coming forward and literally telling the story of what took place when investigations are being prepared, including tipping off Hunter Biden's lawyers that a search warrant was going to be issued. I don't know how somebody stays out of jail after tipping off lawyers for a subject of an investigation, but that's what happened. And so now they're going to look into this and get to the bottom of this, because if it weren't for these IRS whistleblowers who you're not by law allowed to retaliate against in any way, we wouldn't have even gotten this conviction on the gun charges, which was a open and shut case, even in Delaware, where supposedly Joe Biden's got plenty of sway. Well, moving on, here's the other national news story that I wanted to make sure we covered. An alleged El Salvador gang member who has been charged in the rape and killing of a Maryland mom, Rachel Morin, actually crossed the border illegally at least 3 times in 2 months before eluding agents on the 4th try. And this is the guy who was wanted for murdering a mom who just went for a run, like a walk someplace. And this was in Maryland, a place not necessarily known for its high immigrant crime. So this means that, a great distance from the border, there is a direct effect upon states. Every state is a border state. And yeah, so they murdered 37-year-old mom of 5, Rachel Morin. It's heartbreaking because you see this guy and you know that for every one guy that they catch, how many more guys are floating back and forth across that border, involved with gangs, which are also running a lot of the smuggling operations, and then doing whatever they want when they come into the United States and eluding authorities or going to sanctuary cities and towns and states where they cannot easily be found and detained and arrested and prosecuted and deported using regular police methods. So this guy is a perfect example of the ability to go back and forth across what is an open border and do so despite the fact that he's wanted for murder. This is a gotaway. This guy is what you call a gotaway. He's somebody who's not trying to be captured at the border by the Border Patrol, and he's out doing this stuff and then fleeing across the border. By the way, Martin Hernandez, the guy's last name, has allegedly killed another woman in El Salvador days before he legally entered the U.S. It's not clear when he was linked to that case. But after finally evading U.S. Border Patrol and escaping into America, he was here in the U.S. for no more than a few weeks before he allegedly launched a brutal home invasion and assault against a 9-year-old girl and her mom in Los Angeles. He was not caught, and about 5 months after that, allegedly killed Rachel Morin. Rachel Morin was a fitness buff with a cleaning business, entrepreneur, and she was walking alone on Ma and Pa Heritage Trail in Bel Air in Maryland. Her naked body was found with signs of severe trauma, and her family said it appears her head had been smashed in with a rock. Now, let's remember that there was a bill called the Laken Riley bill, which was specifically brought forward in the House of Representatives to address this, to make it a requirement that local authorities comply with and required federal authorities when someone is found to have been involved with criminal activity to remove and deport them if there is no pending prosecution. So there could be people alive if that bill became law. And the only way to change that is to change the U.S. Senate and who's leading it, where the bill is stuck and gone nowhere, and the president to sign it. And then enforce it, by the way, because I don't think anybody believes when Joe Biden says he's going to do something, he's actually going to do it. He's not. That's one thing that's been consistent about him. He's consistently not done things he said he was going to do. Yeah, I mean, dozens of people make it across the border for everyone that is trying to evade Border Patrol and get caught. So our country's flooded with these folks. And flooded doesn't mean that all millions and millions of people are murderers. That's always the phony defense that the open borders people give. It's that it doesn't actually take that many to unleash a crime wave or a bunch of very devastating terrorist attacks that could kill thousands of people. 19 people pulled off 9/11, and we're really not that much more secure at this point. I know that in Bend very recently, some lost driver actually just drove out onto the aircraft runway at the regional airport there in Bend, and it's just like, yeah, that doesn't sound like an airport that's going to stop terrorists from coming and killing people and getting into and landing and taking off in planes. So just think, we've flooded our country with these people, and we know that the 8 that were caught the other week are a very good example, as in terrorists, of just the tip of the iceberg. So, by the way, this guy was eventually tracked down in Tulsa, Oklahoma, 2 weeks past the I guess the home invasion, another home invasion that he did, for which there was surveillance footage of him. And well, it actually took the cops 3 more months until May. They ID'd him, and then they figured out he was wanted in both of these crimes, and then arrested, casually sitting at a bar just before midnight Friday night. Yeah, that just tells you that it's right here, right under our noses, happening all around us, and the authorities have like no plans to do anything about it. Nothing. No, they're actually too busy trying to prosecute President Trump for non-crimes. Meanwhile, back here in Oregon, there's been some interesting news. A missing California woman has been this is actually on the West Coast, but it involves Oregon. A missing California woman has been rescued, and 9 men arrested in a human trafficking mission. A missing woman was rescued, and a Gresham man was arrested on a theft warrant. A Portland man was arrested on gun charges, and several other men were arrested on prostitution-related charges during a human trafficking mission in East Portland Tuesday, June 11th. The Portland Police Bureau said the woman was reunited with her family in California, and Daniel J. Harding, 24, of Gresham, was taken into custody for a Clackamas County warrant for second-degree theft. He was caught up in a wave of arrests conducted along a targeted patrol along Southeast 82nd Avenue. Shantae Kindred, 46, of Portland, was arrested for felon in possession of a firearm, unlawful possession of a loaded firearm, first-degree theft, unlawful possession of a firearm, and parole violations. Just a few things. And then 7 other men were arrested and cited for commercial sex solicitation. By the way, there's a political party in this state that thought it would be a super awesome idea to decriminalize all of this. So these 7 guys probably would just be applauded as entrepreneurs if the Democrats had their way. And they towed 4 vehicles in the process. There is a human trafficking problem. We are the mecca for human trafficking here in Oregon. And I think it's time that we face facts that this is a problem that's grown so much that we're just going to have to actually take it very seriously, as if it's slavery, as if it's organized crime, and really crack down and break it up. But you're not going to get that until there's a change in leadership at every level. Speaking of a change of leadership at every level, Portland, the mayor's race is going to be a big race. That's going to take place this fall. It's going to take place under the new ranked choice voting system, which God knows what result that might produce. But it's approaching now double-digit numbers of candidates that are filing for mayor, less than 5 months before the city holds its first election, under also a new and dramatically different form of government. So they're changing the election system for this one, and they're going to have a different form of government where the mayor is more of like the executive and has no vote, no say over the city council. And the city council will be like this mini legislature consisting of all these ne'er-do-wells, that some of whom may well get elected, who caused a lot of the problems that Portland is in. And so, in addition to 3 of the current city commissioners, Rene Gonzalez, Mingus Mapps, and Carmen Rubio, they're going to have all these other candidates running. They've also got this is the perfect storm of all liberal ideas on election and election reform, and stuff they say makes everything better. They actually have public financing for these campaigns if you follow the rules. So Rene Gonzalez, I think he's probably the front runner. He's certainly, if not the front runner, the most desirable candidate to see win. He represents the most clear version of change from what has been happening in Portland, and would complete a restoration of law and order leaning elected officials, now that we're going to see the departure of Mike Schmidt and the Schmidt Show in favor of Nathan Vasquez. And also, just to mention, Mingus Mapps, who's the other candidate, has raised money but remains thousands in debt because he's struggling to find donors. So even under a partially publicly financed campaign system, he's struggling. So I guess we're going to see where that leads. But there's others. There's a guy named Keith Wilson who owns a trucking company. Liv Osthus, a Portland stripper known by her stage name Viva Las Vegas. She's planning to stake her capitalism on restoring a sense of optimism to the city and championing its artistic and creative communities. Interesting. So the nude creative community is going to take a big role in this. It would appear that the Gonzalez has already reached the threshold with more than 800 reporting individual campaign donors, which apparently triggers some public matching funds. I just wonder how this is going to go, because there's an awful lot at stake here. But this is the reform that people thought would actually help produce a better election outcome that is better for the city. We're going to find out. And what happens in Portland really does affect everybody. Here's another thing about Portland that recently came out. The city council, the current city council, voted to beef up security at city facilities. So they're beefing up security with private security, a contract with Allied Universal Security Services. And that's just because apparently the mess that has been made of the city in terms of safety and security has finally gotten to the city council, to the point that they have to pour $8.5 million into enhancing security everywhere where the city has facilities. It says something about what's happened to the city when the city itself can't protect its own facilities without spending money on private security. If you recall, there were some city councilors like John Hardesty, who no longer are on the city council, who had problems with even allowing private security to do anything in the city. Just imagine if she had her way now, you wouldn't even have that option. It would literally just be a disaster area. Yeah, it is a mess. And I think that Portland, I hope, can start to show the way forward. Let me see if I can, I'll post these articles, because I think it's important if you want to read more of the detail about who these people are and what they propose. But yes, the city council is beefing up facilities. Lars Larson had something to say about that. Lars said how politicians protect themselves at our expense. Well, it's true. The people that aren't getting the protection, the citizens who can't count on cops to show up in a reasonable amount of time, are actually going to use the money the taxpayers provide to make sure they themselves are well taken care of. This is the same city which tolerated and even glorified the rioters who demanded defunding of the police and said all cops are, quote, bastards, unquote. That's right. I think if you want to live in a city, you should live under the same system that the private citizens are experiencing and not just turn around and hand the bill to anybody that you want. By the way, one casualty of Portland's many, many problems is the Portland's World Naked Bike Ride. It's going to take a 1-year hiatus. I think that could be a very positive thing because I'm not sure that I think it'll be gone for a year, and a lot of people are going to say, well, okay, maybe the city's better off. But the World Naked Bike Ride, because it's become so large and because people love it so much and because people come in from all around the world, there's just so much that has to go into the messaging, to the communications, to the deep planning, and to the bazillion bits and pieces, says longtime organizer Megan Sinnott. The ride began in 2004 as a protest against global dependence on fossil fuels and has grown to see as many as 10,000 participants at the annual summer event. But the organizer points out that not only are participants in this ride more vulnerable because they don't have any clothes on, but many of them are often participating in on a large bike for the first time and may even be infrequent cyclists. Yeah, that's a bad combo. Infrequent naked cyclists. So the organizers say it's too difficult for the city to make it as safe as possible. That's right. It's not safe for nude bicyclists in the city of Portland. You've reached the point where you might even get the attention of some of the most loopy liberals out there who have to admit that it's no longer Portland that's weird. It's Portland that's dangerous, and it's dangerous for weird people now. By the way, I didn't know this, but they have smaller rides that are going to take place this summer for people who still feel like they need to ride naked. There's the full moon rides. There's a fig leaf ride, and there's actually a naked zombie ride. So don't worry. If you really, really have to have your naked bike ride, you're going to be able to get it in Portland. They weren't going to be able to stop this from happening, and I think we all knew that. So there's a really good column that I think is worth taking a look at and considering what he said is the 2022 Oregon Democrat gubernatorial candidate Nick Kristof, who was removed from the ballot because the Secretary of State said he didn't qualify to be on the ballot, which is a fascinating operation given how they bend the rules however they like other times. But to grease the wheel for their chosen candidate, Tina Kotek, any rule can be bent or broken or suddenly enforced. But Nicholas Kristof wrote a column saying, actually, things all seem to go wrong when we're in charge, as in liberal Democrats. And he specifically points to the West Coast states of Oregon and California. He said some of the bluest parts of the country, cities on the West Coast, are a mess. Centrist voters can reasonably lack. Why put liberals in charge nationally when the places where they have the greatest control are plagued by homelessness, crime, and dysfunction? He said, I'll try to answer that question in a moment, but liberals like me need to face the painful fact that something has gone badly wrong where we're in charge, from San Diego to Seattle. He said, I'm an Oregonian who bores people at cocktail parties by singing the praises of the West. But the truth is that too often we offer a version of progressivism that doesn't result in progress, as he describes it. We are more likely to believe that housing is a human right than conservatives in Florida and Texas, but less likely to actually get people housed. We accept a yawning gulf between our values and our outcomes. And of course, he supplies a map as part of his report showing that people are fleeing liberal states, Oregon, California, and New York, and moving to conservative states. Also, the highest cost of living exists in the liberal states, and they show another map to that effect. Now, Nicholas Kristof goes on to say, so the problem isn't with liberalism, it's West Coast liberalism. The two states with the highest rate of unsheltered homeless are California and Oregon. The three states with the lowest rates of unsheltered homelessness are blue ones in the Northeast, Vermont, New York, and Maine. Liberal Massachusetts has some of the finest schools in the country, while liberal Washington and Oregon have below average high school graduation rates. Oregon ranks dead last for youth mental health services, according to Mental Health America, while Washington, D.C. and Delaware rank best. Drug overdoses have appeared have risen last year in every Democrat state on the West Coast, while they dropped last year in each Democrat state in the Northeast. The homicide rate in Portland last year was more than double of New York City. And they actually show this this graph and how it took off in April, starting in like May, June of 2020, and it just skyrocketed the rate of homicides. He goes on to kind of dig into some of the details, but I think I'm not looking at this as a sudden confession by liberals, but it does mean that they actually have some differences maybe with some of the Northeast liberals. The Northeast, those states can often be competitive enough that Republicans do win. Like there was a pretty liberal Republican governor in Massachusetts. They've had several Republican governors over the last 20 to 25 years. The Republicans get elected in many parts of New York, and were very closely competitive in the governor's race there. Several of the other states have also elected Republicans to various offices. Well, his point is maybe that actually provides enough of a threat, enough of a balance, so that Northeast liberals know that they have to deliver results. They can't just go and virtue signal and then spend a bunch of money and everything gets worse. West Coast liberals apparently don't feel that pressure, and they should. And this is something that should appeal to people who actually think that they would like to see a different result than they've been getting. Well, they're going to have to vote differently. And it's going to have to be swing voters. It's not enough for Republicans to just say, I'm voting for a Republican, and then liberals still get elected and feel no accountability for results. This is the moment, actually. They should seize the day. And there was a pretty interesting discussion about this on Fox News about West Coast liberalism, and a review of this article, which I think is worth reading as well. He has really forced a conversation, and maybe this is a productive conversation to have in the state. Politics, he says, politics always is part theater, but out west too often we settle for being performative rather than substantive. I think that describes Oregon perfectly, not to mention California. It's heavy on the virtue signaling, heavy on the spending, heavy on the taxes, and virtually inconsequential when it comes to results. Kristof provides an example. He said, like the fact that Oregon took money from an already tight education budget to put tampons in boys' restrooms in elementary schools, including boys' restrooms in kindergartens. So they're taking away money from learning and putting it into tampons in kindergarten restrooms. He also mentioned that Portland set up a Freedom Fund, a volunteer group that pays bail for people of color. And he explained how it paid bail for a man after he was arrested for allegedly threatening the life of his girlfriend. Once the guy got out of jail, he murdered the woman. This clearly, the blood is in the hands of people who do this stuff, and it's insane. Kristof noted that despite being inspired by anti-racist critical race theorists like Ibram X. Kendi, West Coast leaders have impeded home construction in ways that made cities unaffordable, especially for people of color. This is what's ironic, is that these policies that actually make it difficult for everyone to buy a home or find an affordable residence hurt people who can least afford it the most. He said, we let increasing numbers of people struggle with homelessness, particularly Black and brown people. Black people in Portland are also murdered at higher rates than in cities more notorious for violence. And Seattle and Portland have some of the greatest racial disparities in arrests in the country. He said, I think intentions and framing can matter, but it's absolutely true that good intentions are not enough. What matters is improving opportunities and quality of life. And the best path to do that is relentless empiricism. And by that, of course, he means pursuit of facts and results. He said, we need to get our act together. Less purity, more pragmatism will go a long way. And perhaps the first step must be the humility to acknowledge our failures. So I'm sure this has upset a great many hyper liberals. I know not many of them watch this show, but I think all of us know somebody who fits that category. Please share this with them. Please share these stories with them, because if it's going to take a dedicated lifelong liberal to have that come to Jesus moment, then so be it. Maybe that's part of what the path back to sanity that our state needs. You know, the other thing that we need to have in this state, we need to have accountability. And let me give you two examples of where it's just egregious, but we have to spell it out. Oregon is still fixing the state employee payroll system after problems last year. They were unable to auditors were unable to completely review Oregon's new $21 million payroll and human services system that plagued thousands of state workers with inaccurate paychecks in early 2023. Well, this statewide audit that was released on Monday, June 10th, looks at all these, a variety of state and government agencies, and they can't even effectively audit themselves anymore. There are 44,000 state government employees, and they spent years planning this system, and it still is being fixed, still being audited to figure out if it's even getting better. And this is a state that can't do IT projects, which is amazing, because the West Coast is generally known for being on the cutting edge of IT. You know, we have one of the largest chip production facilities in the world here, as well as an area called the Silicon Forest that surrounds Intel's facility. We certainly have software companies and startups here, and yet we have a state government that represents the worst of the worst when it comes to IT projects. And I don't want to say that it's necessarily all the people working in the state government that are doing a bad job, but they clearly are poorly led and unaccountable. And this just keeps happening over and over. We know this happened with the Department of Motor Vehicles, that they had a messed up system that actually made it difficult for people to get renewals. We know this happened with unemployment benefits. During the pandemic, it overwhelmed the system, and they never really fully recovered from that. They just fired some people finally after a year of complete screw ups, and it gradually stabilized. But my understanding is it's still not, that system still hasn't been effectively been replaced, which is already 10 years too old when it happened. And of course, you know, the famous one is the Cover Oregon website, which is a $300 million boondoggle to implement Oregon's Obamacare website, in which they had to abandon it and just use the federal one after spending all that money. No one got canned because of this. No one went to jail for committing fraud, and therefore we need accountability for that to happen. And here's where accountability can begin. Senator Daniel Bonham, state senator who we've had on this program a number of times, very good guy, working hard to lead Republicans in the state Senate, has asked a question. He goes, What happened to the $500,000 Democrat campaign investigation? You know, the one where they pretended that one person donated and it actually was a straw donor name for another person who was in fact the donor and had connections with STX, I think is the name of the company, the crypto investment company that has Sam Bankman-Fried and the whole thing. That money, which by the way was also partially there's a lot of communications about who arranged this and who knew what and when, because this money was contributed in 2022 in time to help the election, and then later discovered who was the actual donor. And then, of course, after many, many months, the Democrat Party of Oregon said that they would return the money. And I think at that point, it even involved paying money that was required because of bankruptcy proceedings against the crypto company whose employee was the straw donor source of money. And so he's asking, since progressives are on a kick lately for accountability of funds, he says it begs the question if our own Oregon Department of Justice will ever open a criminal investigation into the Democrats' 2022 misreported donation. A year ago, around this time, the DOJ announced that they were reviewing potential criminal investigation into the party's failure to report a Las Vegas-based donor who gave $500,000 to the Democrat Party of Oregon under a false name. Election officials with close ties to the Democratic Party tried to quietly handle the issue by prematurely announcing that no investigation was going to happen, while quietly making them pay a fine that was ambiguously reduced by over $20,000. So the officials tried to distance themselves with this fine reduction and potential cover-up attempt. A request for continued criminal investigation was sent to the Attorney General. Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum recused herself from the criminal investigation as the Democrat Party gave nearly $115,000 to her campaign fund since 2012. So, in other words, she was somebody receiving money from the Democrat Party that she was supposed to investigate. An assistant attorney general representing the elections division wrote a legal memo stating the Democrat Party deprived the public of knowing who was contributing enormous sums of money to their party in a general election when election transparency is the most pivotal for election voters. It's then that you actually have to have this information, has to be timely, and has to be accurate. Right before elections, you have 7-day reporting windows. You're supposed to report any and all donations in that time. But if you lie, and it takes a month or longer to figure out who actually was the donor, then you can it looks like they're getting away with fraud. And under Oregon law, it is a Class C felony to make or accept a campaign contribution under a false name. This month, we've heard many progressives state that no one is above the law. Time will tell on this case if they truly mean it. Kudos, Senator Bonham. This is a great question. And this is something that we should throw back in the faces of every Democrat who tries to give us speeches about Donald Trump and his legal circumstances, when hush money is not illegal and never has been. And it's really something that people do all the time, which is have agreements with people that require that they be silent about personal circumstances. It happens in all kinds of divorce proceedings and that kind of stuff too, as well as lawsuits and settlements and business arrangements. But here we have a pretty obvious effort to defraud people right before an election with an enormous sum of money, which they got to use it. So they got the gain from the money, and paying it back later when compelled by a federal bankruptcy court is not an act of contrition. It is time that a Class C felony like this is investigated, and everybody who knew about this and had some knowledge of it, whether they were on the giving end or the receiving end, should be fully investigated and prosecuted. One of those people that seemed to have a lot of knowledge of this in advance, was a key person working for Senator Wyden. This has been reported many times. And Jeff Eager, who's an investigative journalist and podcaster, reported pretty extensively on this. And this is something that can only be fixed by people facing those consequences, and everybody who knew about it also facing consequences. So please have a look at that. Please start to advocate for accountability wherever possible. Lastly, I just kind of want to wrap up here. I haven't really got to read this article, but I wanted to share it with you in case you wanted to. And it was an interview. It's Nigel Jaquiss, and he's talking about the death of former Oregon Governor Neil Goldschmidt, and the impact he had, what he meant, what he did, how he kind of destroyed himself politically, and never really got over it. And he's before my time in Oregon, so I don't really have a history. I just know the stories that have lived on after that. But he's also been one of the chief symbols of hypocrisy that Democrats have had to face. And these consequences, this is a great example where the full consequences have not been experienced for a great many people, not just former Governor Goldschmidt, but the people who ran interference for him, people who argued that it was no biggie, that we had bigger fish to fry, that maybe the girl was a liar and when she wasn't. And now we know that the consequences this has in the long run are pretty profound for the state and everybody who's left behind. But give this a watch, and maybe you can share what you think of this tomorrow on tomorrow's show. Don't know what our guest is going to be. I've got a number of irons in the fire, so I hope to give you a good show tomorrow night. But in the meantime, I want to thank you for joining me here tonight. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, all of our great listeners and viewers. And please share the show with everyone you can. I hope it was informative, insightful, maybe even inspiring in a way that gets us to do something about all these problems. And it's very important that we share this with so many different people who are maybe just starting to wake up. We're hearing about them every day. I know. I hope they wake up, but I think they can only wake up by having somebody who cares about them tell them this information, even if they don't like hearing it right now. Maybe one day in the not too distant future, or when they go cast their ballot, it'll make a difference. So thanks for joining me, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow night on the next episode of The Captive Audience. Have a great